Good evening and welcome to the Children's Services Overview Scrutiny meeting. It's now 6 p.m. and I would like to start the meeting. I'm Councillor Sarah Muldowney and I'm the chair of this committee. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting is being recorded for publication on the council website. However, we will be pausing this recording at item 4 on the agenda, as that report is restricted and will be held in exempt session under Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. We will begin recording again at item 5. As this meeting is being held at South Essex College instead of the council chamber, there is a time limit for the use of the venue, which is at 9:30 p.m. If the items on the agenda are not concluded by 9:30 p.m, we will adjourn this meeting and recommence at the next meeting. If this happens, we will look to adjourn once the report has been concluded and before the start of the next report on the agenda. Officers attending virtually on Microsoft Teams, please use the raise your hand option when you wish to speak, and Grace will note this down and will let me know. Item 1, apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Anderson, Sally Kawaja, Nicola Crouch and Sarah Barlow. And I've also received notification that Councillor Lee Watson will be coming, but she's going to be late because she was dealing with a major incident at work. Grace, have you received any other apologies?
No, Joe, we received no other apologies, but Councillor Bambi is here substituting for Councillor Little.
Okay, thank you.
I'd just like to say that Councillor Rigby will be joining us a bit later. She's substitute for Alex.
Right, okay, thank you. Item 2, urgent items of business. I've not agreed to any items of urgent business. However, we have had a briefing note, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services Procurement, circulated on the 30th of September 2021. Are members happy to confirm that they've received and read this briefing note? Yes. Item 3, declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations of interest to make? Item 4, as mentioned before, we will now be pausing this recording, and I kindly ask, well, there are no members of the public and press, so you don't need them to leave the room, but we'll pause the recording as we now enter into an exempt session. Now we'll move on to item 5, which is the children's social care performance for the first quarter of 2021 to 22. The report's on pages 17 to 36. Can I ask Janet Simon to present the report, please?
So this report is around children's social care performance across the service in the first quarter, as you've said. So as we've come out of COVID lockdown restrictions, we've seen some fluctuations in terms of performance across the piece. So the volumes and contacts and referrals received into the MASH have reduced during the months of lockdown, and then we've had significant increases after the easing of lockdown. And this is demonstrated in the performance in the first quarter of this year. So between April and June, the number of multi-agency safeguarding contacts received was 1,558 during the easing of lockdown, compared to 1,061 between the same time the previous year when we had full lockdown. So you can see, as we come out of lockdown, things increase. There had been a 47% increase in the number of MASH contacts when comparing the two quarters. So the number of referrals between April and June was also seen an increase, which is in line with the above. And as of June 30th of June, there were 94% of children and family assessments were completed in timescale. So the timescale has been consistently maintained over 90%, and there's evidence of good performance. So at the end of June, we had 108 children subject to a child protection plan. We've seen a steady reduction from 159 at the end of quarter 1 to 135 at the end of quarter 2 and 111 at the end of quarter 3. So we've seen it sort of stabilise sort of in quarter 3. So we've seen an increase in the number of children step down to early help, which is positive. That means that children are receiving the service much earlier before they're stepped up, and they're not stepped up into social care. Multi-agency safeguarding hub continues to support a shared understanding and management of threshold decisions with our partners, and that children get the right help at the right time. We continue to provide services to approximately 296 day care leave children looked after, and approximately the same amount of care leavers, so our numbers are similar in both of those numbers. What we have are care leavers who are 16 pluses who are in care, are also considered care leavers, so they're not counted in the care leaver number, otherwise we'd be duplicating what we're counting there. Children are visited and they're seen regularly. So in terms of the summaries, you can see the contacts, you can see the months where we come in and out of lockdown, and you can actively see the changes. In June, you can see how it jumps. And March, April, as we came out of lockdown, so you see it going down when we're in lockdown, and then you see as we come out of lockdown, it goes back up, and then it starts to stabilise again. That's the same for the referrals and for the contacts. For the assessments, you can see the amount of assessments completed. So we've had an increase of around 19% in terms of the amount of assessments that have been done over the year, and that correlates with the amount of referrals as well that we have. Children looked after, our children looked after numbers of we've had some increase, and then it went down towards the end of June. So you can see we started at 298 in April 2020, and then you can see the LAT numbers going up slightly, they come down a little bit, and then by the end of May they're 307, and then they go back down again in June, and I think they're back at around 307 now, as of today. In terms of our looked after children numbers, we're kind of in line with our statistical neighbours, slightly below, and around the same as the national average, so we're not kind of out of kilter with what other people are doing. I think we're higher than our regional neighbours, but we're not statistical neighbours with them. In terms of the unaccompanied asylum seekers, we have our 0.07 is 31. There's been a reduction in the entry of US into the Essex courts in 2020. During the period of COVID, we've started to see some easing of that. We've seen more US come in. So here you can see at the end of June, there were 24 unaccompanied asylum seeking children being looked after by the authority. I think there's been an increase, and I think in the next quarter, as we report, we'll start to see an increase. In terms of the number of children that go missing, what we can see is the missing episodes. You can see the episodes started and the individual children as well, so it shows you the episodes and how many children that equates to. So for it's not dissimilar across the 2 years. We can see that it's the same, a similar amount of episodes, but that involves more children in 2021, the same period of time. And some of that could be around at the time we were at the height of lockdown, that less children were going out, less episodes of missing. In terms of our return of interviews, this is something we're working on. We know that we need to improve the performance in that area. We offer return home interviews to all our children, but they don't always take it up. At the end of June, our performance has dipped slightly. We've been holding weekly meetings to look at our return home interviews to make sure that we're absolutely tracking those young people and making sure that we're on top of that. And we should see in the second quarter those numbers start to go up. That's an absolute priority for us. So we're absolutely on top. We are looking at that regularly. In terms of the number of children on the child protection plan, we can see where the numbers of children have reduced over the last year in terms of the number of children on the child protection plan. We're probably more in line with our statistical neighbours now. We were always slightly higher than our statistical neighbours. So there has been a concerted effort to make sure we have the right children on the plan at the right time. So we've done lots of work around that. Obviously they're all subject to review. We also have a tracking meeting to make sure that those cases are looked at as well. In terms of children on a repeat child protection plan, we have sort of 25%. You can see the numbers of children repeat on the subject to a child protection plan. That's something we look at, because the children have been on a plan before. We want to make sure that they're not coming back on a plan again. And if we have, is there something we need to do? And children become subject to a plan for the second time doesn't necessarily mean they've been subject to a plan before. They could have been subject to a plan elsewhere. In terms of our age distribution of our care leavers, what we can see is that over the last year, we've seen an increase in the numbers of young people open to our care leaving service who are over the age of 21. So there were changes in the law which said that young people aged between care leavers used to be open up to the age of 21 unless they were in full-time education. But now young people can return for a service any time up to the age of 25, and we've seen the numbers go up significantly in the last year. And that means we're providing support, especially like in COVID, where young people who were on maybe 0-hour contracts or needed additional support are coming back and asking for support from us, and we're providing that. There's a focus on the needs of our aftercare population to make sure that they've got opportunities for training and employment. You can see that around 49% of our care leavers were in part or full-time education, employment or training, compared to 59% in the previous year. And we know that some of that was impacted on by COVID. And there's a focus on recovery and increasing those numbers of young people. And I know Michelle's service, Inspire, are doing quite a lot of work around that. In terms of suitable accommodation, if you look at our numbers, so 84% of our young people are in suitable accommodation at the end of quarter one this year, which is an increase on the previous year, and it was 82%. So we're kind of in line with England and slightly below statistical neighbours. So suitable accommodation has to be that we consider that young person to be somewhere that is absolutely fine. So, for example, if a young person's in prison, that's not considered suitable accommodation. We don't use things like bed and breakfast for our young people. But if we don't know where they're living, if they've chosen not to be engaged with us and they don't tell us where they're living, we can't afford to suitable accommodation. In terms of the young people who we're in touch with around just over 90% of our care leavers. Some young people will decide that they don't want to be in touch with us. We try to use different methods to be in touch with our young people. So we try to use text, we try to use FaceTime, we'll do face-to-face contact, we'll try to do all sorts of different things to remain in contact. But for some young people, they get to a certain age and they want to get on with their lives and they don't want to be in touch with us. And on some level, we have to accept that. For the numbers of children adopted, and the average timeliness in terms of adoption, Thurrock is around 306 days, England 346, and the statistical neighbours 367. So our performance has been pretty good, and it's a 3-year average. So this year it's gone up to 341. We'd expect that. We know there's been delays in court in terms of resolving cases, and also we've had a higher proportion of parents to the minute. So what happens is, if we go into proceedings and the plan is adoption, if the court grants us a placement order, that means we can look for adopted placements. And so if we find an adopted placement, most parents will appeal that decision, and that puts a delay in terms of us being able to progress that, so that could put time on it. Obviously, permanency for children is key. You know, we want children to have permanent homes, whether that's that they can return home to their parents, whether it's adoption, whether it's placement with family or friends, or long-term fostering. In terms of where children are placed and the distance from home, we measure things like, you know, children who are within 20 miles of their home in Thurrock. And at the end of June this year, our numbers have decreased in terms of the placement distance from home to placement. So that's something we're working on too. We're working on making sure we can get more foster placements in Thurrock. We're also working on the residential estate as well, to see if we can get as we discussed, getting residentials in place. So that's the performance for children's social care, and I'm sure there's questions.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you for the report. Have anybody got any questions? No? Councillor Watson.
Thank you for your report. Thank you so much. For those children at the age, coming up to the age of 16, 17 that are neat, and there's like they've got concerns and like we've seen previously, I'm assuming that an adult social care will be working, the carer will be working, the adult social worker will be working with the children's social worker for the transition period. Would you be working alongside each other to transition from children into the adult provision?
Yeah. So we have an aftercare service, and they start working with the young people from the age of 16, and then at the age of 18, they become the main worker. So the child will have a social worker up to the age of 18, to their 18th birthday, but the aftercare worker will work with them from the age of 16, so there's a smooth transition, so they get to know that person. They will work with them around their education, employment, training, making sure they've got their documents, making sure they start thinking about their transitions into adulthood, where they're going to live, what that's going to look like, what support they need. They'll work closely with and share service, and inspire them to make sure that all those sorts of things are in place.
Excellent. Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, I've got.
Councillor Smith.
It's regarding return home interviews. What is the circumstance where you get one? Obviously, the kids, are they about to go home or have they already gone home?
So it's where a child has gone missing, and missing, as I said, can be anything from 1 hour to a couple of days. And so once the child returns home, they usually see it return to place, isn't it? But yeah, it can be returned home as well, because it can be children who are missing from home. It's not just missing from placement. And so once they've returned to where they're living, they'd usually be seen by the police, and you usually get something back from the police to say they've been seen, they've been spoken to, and this is what they say. But as a local authority, we commission Inspire, which Michelle's service runs, supervise what we call return home interviews. And part of that is to have a conversation with the young person, find out where they've been, have a conversation about where they've been, what's happened to them, why they went missing, is there anything we can do differently, and it's to help us to learn lessons from those episodes and to try and build our services around that to support young people and to make sure there isn't anything that we need to kind of feed into the information we have around circumstances for young people. So is it something about the placement? Is it that they were upset by something? Is it that were they going home? So it's trying to establish what the reasons were for going missing. You can have, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I was just saying the figures are relatively low for the ones that are prepared to do that. Do we know the reason for that? Or is it just that if they've already explained it once to the police, they're just not going to be doing it again, they can't bother?
I mean, Janet or I can sort of answer this. I mean, there's no doubt, is there, that the data's not where we want it to be. I think part of the challenge is that, you know, the team, you know, the workers contact the young person, they don't want to return to home interview, or they can't get hold of the young person. So what we're trying to do now is think of more creative ways in which we can enable that to happen. Because as Janet said, it's really important for us to identify, you know, what was the reason. And I mean, some of these things are, I mean, Janet and I spoke about this a lot, some of these might be things that they're just a bit late home. You know, teenagers, forgive me, are a bit late home. You know, sometimes they forget, don't they? They're having a really great time, and you know, they look at their watch and think, oh God. So sometimes, but of course, the placement have to report. Of course, the placement have to report that. It's absolutely the right thing to do. So I think sometimes it's that balance, isn't it, around a teenager just, you know, forgetting the time and not coming home, and then having to have a follow-up interview because actually you're just a little bit late home. So I think it is a key focus for us. It was picked up in the focus visit, so we recognise it's a key area for us. As Janet said, we're meeting weekly to look at what we can do more creatively so that we can get these interviews in place. And you know, when the next report comes through, you know, I would hope to see that there's been an improvement around that, because it is about that learning, isn't it?
Yeah,
you know, what was that experience? So we're having weekly meetings. It is a key focus for us, and you know, hopefully when we come next time, that will have improved. So I don't know, Janet, if you wanted to say more.
Just to pick up on that actually, because at the moment, I mean, this month has sort of been in steady decline since November, and this month, this means that 60% of our children, we don't know why they went missing. Is that correct?
That wouldn't necessarily be correct. So you may have, when you look at the amount of missing episodes, and then you look at the number of children, so some of those children would have been offered several return home interviews.
Right. So it's the number of episodes. So 60% of those episodes we don't know why, but it may have been the same child in multiple episodes. Okay, so it's still quite significant. It's just I'm a little concerned because it did come up on the focus visit, as you said, and it also came up as an area for improvement on the full state inspection.
No, I think that was initial health assessment, I think.
Right, okay. I thought I read that in but it was noted because we weren't. Yeah, it was noted because we weren't offering it to all missing children at that point. We weren't offering. So I think the change that was made after that was that we had the service from Inspire to offer return home interviews.
Yeah, you're right.
All you had a universal offer of that. So
we switched provider after the 2019 inspection.
Yeah. So
could I just sorry, I didn't finish.
So just to see, it would be quite nice the next time the report comes to sort of have a bit more detail about the action plan, which I'm sure you've got, to address this, and just have some more detail in the next time the report comes, so we can be reassured on that point.
Could I just add to that, that it's not that we don't know why the young people have gone missing, it's that some of those young people have said they don't want to have a return home interview, that we, and from a return home interview from Inspire, which is separate. So sometimes they do speak to their social workers about why, or their foster carer or their placement, but they don't want to speak to the independent service that we've got in place, because what you hope from an independent service is if they have something to say about their placement and or their social worker, or it gives them an opportunity to do that. And I think, and some of it is, and that's what we're looking at, is if you have some young people who are going missing 3 or 4 times in a week, going out for the night, coming back, they've been to somewhere with some friends, or they're staying somewhere that we don't want them to be, so it might be with a friend, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, and then they come back to their placement. Sometimes those young people also just go, well, I'm 17, I don't know why you're tracking me like this. I don't actually want to speak to someone about why I'm missing. You know, I've got every right to be with my boyfriend, girlfriend, blah, blah, blah. But we have got to find a way of being able to log the ones where we absolutely know why the young person is missing, and sometimes it is because they're with. And a lot of these young people are 16, 17, but they're not the much younger ones. And certainly with some of our 17-year-olds, that's one of the things about being in care that they don't like, is as a corporate parent, we can't just say it's okay to just spend the night with someone that we don't know enough about them, because we don't know who they are. But if you're 17 and a half and you've got a boyfriend or girlfriend who you think's great, you don't want to hear that. So I think we need to find, and you're right, so for the next report, we need to give you a bit more detail about how many fit in that category, as opposed to there are children and young people out there that we're concerned about and we can't get hold of what that is about for them.
Just a quick question. What's the percentage of male and female in here? Roughly.
I think it's around 60, but I think it's more male than it is female. It is more male, but I couldn't give you the exact figure, but I can find that.
I was just going to ask with regards to the return home interviews, when you mentioned that sometimes they'll talk to their carer or whatever they're under, why can't we count that as a return home interview?
Well, that's part of what we're doing.
Because obviously, I mean, I know when I was a kid, if somebody from outside was trying to talk to me, I'd automatically think, no, I wouldn't talk to you. But you would talk to your mum and your dad or someone you trusted.
Yeah.
As their professional carers anyway, surely that would count as a...
Well, I think there's something about Inspire is independent from children's social care and from placements. So it's in case a young person has been running away because they've got an issue about something that they don't want to share with the social worker or their carer, it gives them that opportunity. But absolutely, we need to be registering where children have spoken to, either because sometimes when the police find young people, they do have a chat with them about what was that about, where are you, what have you done. So we need to get smarter about getting that information and recording that, so that you can see which return home interviews are being done by Inspire as independent, which young people were happy to speak to their social worker, their carer or the police. But we need to get that information, because the real point of this is that we understand what the issues are, and are there any themes, is there something we should be doing?
I just think that it's more important to get information rather than who it is that gets the information. So when you've got it, you know where it comes from, as long as it's a trusted person that's actually getting the information.
I mean, the thing is that it needs to be captured, because at the moment, I mean, I know in the Ofsted focus visit they said that obviously some children are reluctant to take up return to home interviews, would actually benefit from follow-up with social workers and talk to their social workers. But unless that's being captured in some way, we can't know, can we? We can't know whether there are issues or not, so it's a risk. It's a risk that there may be an issue, there may be an issue that's developed that we need to be sure of. So yeah, it'd be good to hear more about how you plan to do that in the future.
And to be honest, I think if you've got a really good relationship with your foster parents or your social worker, they're going to get a hell of a lot more out in terms of the issues, what's happening, than the independent around the corner, regardless. Because it may not happen on that day, it might take them 2 or 3 weeks for them to actually tell them what happened, but you will find out.
Yeah.
So
Please.
Yes.
Right. If somebody go missing for 1 hour, do you do a return interview, or is it when it becomes consistent?
So if they've been missing for an hour and it's been recorded as a missing episode, then they would be able to return.
Would that not be annoying if somebody just went off for 1 hour and you have to sit down with authority to read the details of where they've been?
Yes. I mean, for some of our young people, as Gina said, a young person who's 17, maybe 18 in 3 weeks' time, they would probably say, I'm not missing, I'm out. So yes.
Some
young
people
people. It depends on the age, wouldn't it? If a very young child went missing for an hour, that would be concerning, and absolutely you'd want to have that conversation and try and find out what happened. If a 17-year-old was clear, I was at my girlfriend's, it's just down the road, I was an hour late home, then it's less worrying. So I think it is about putting the context around it for you, so you have a better understanding of what it is.
If an hour late, would the police turn up? They always turn up?
They may not turn up straight away, but
Well, they have
if
to,
the young
yeah.
person, usually if they're an hour late, if they come back, then the foster carer or the placement would contact the police and say they're back. But the police do usually visit, they will speak to young people, and they send those reports to us, so we have copies of those reports.
I mean, I think from the viewpoint of us all being corporate parents, I mean, as a parent, if I've got a 15-year-old, if he does come in late and hasn't let me know, then I would talk to him about where he's been and what he's been doing. So, from that standpoint, we have to put ourselves in the standpoint of being, we are corporate parents to these children. So, from my point of view, I would feel more comforted if the information was been captured in some way. And I think it is good that we have the independent service. And if we can capture the other more informal ways that we're doing return home interviews, then that seems like that would be a good way of doing it. That would be adequate. Any more questions? Thank you. So we move on to item 6, which is. Oh, sorry. So we need to agree recommendations, and I did just have one comment on recommendations actually. I was reading through them. So Recommendation 1.1, that members review the areas of improvement in children's social care and work undertaken to date to manage demand for statutory social care services. I wonder, when we get this report again, can we have it saying review the areas of improvement and areas for improvement?
Yes.
Because we're a scrutiny committee after all, so we do want to be looking at both ends of the spectrum there. Are we agreed on the recommendation?
Yeah, agreed.
So we'll move on to item 6, Thurrock Childcare Sufficiency Annual Assessment 2021. It's on pages 37 to 74. Can I ask Andrea Winston, who's been waiting patiently on Teams, to introduce her report, please?
Hi, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a report that we bring to you every year. It's an annual childcare sufficiency report that, by law, we're asked to report to elected members, and the purpose of the report is to inform providers and parents of the range of childcare in the borough, number of childcare places required, and the number of childcare places provided.
Can I stop you a minute, Andrew? It's just this, you're perfect, but the sound here is quite bad. So I think Grace is going to see whether switching over to the laptop speakers actually improves the sound.
Yeah.
But you look good on big screen.
Try it now, Andrew.
Is that any better?
Yes, that's considerably better. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try. I'll start again so that in case you missed anything. So this is an annual report that comes to you and elected members every year. The purpose of the report is to inform providers, early years providers, and parents, and any interested parties in the local authority of the types of provision for childcare within the borough, where there are the numbers of provision, and whether there's any shortages across the borough by ward. So that's sorted by ward. It provides demographic and textual picture, and also information about the demand, and it provides details of the take up of the 2-year-old funded, 3- and 4-year-old funded places across the borough. So it's a report for information, and it's the reason that we share it with you is because we're expected to, as part of the Childcare and Families Act 2014. So the report goes through how we work with providers around quality, and it also then, as part of the report, we survey providers and parents, and so it gives you a broad outcome of the survey that we do every year. It shows you demand, population, the changes to the population, the supply of early education childcare places across the borough, what generally is in place, and average prices for childcare, so parents can see what the average price is and then compare that to their own provider or preferred provider. And then it goes into the detail for each ward, the number of children, and the number of places, and whether there is sufficient places or not, and the quality of the provision. So it's not it's the same report every year. It's not any different to the report we brought to you last year. So I think I'll just leave it open to questions, really, to see if there's any questions anybody wanted to ask of the report. Well, yeah, I think you can interrogate the report to your heart's content, but it is what it is. There isn't anything. How can I put it? It's just a factual report about what's available.
I think, Andrea, apologies. I think you missed the chair's comment. Actually, I think I think her comment was she was quite shocked, and I think you said about the price.
About the prices.
I think that was the question, Andrea.
So page 52, the average prices of early school years childcare sort of between £5 and £7 an hour. I'm just wondering how, like a family on, you know, like the living wage actually affords childcare. I mean, I know there's obviously there is some help, but if you're a worker who's working a 40-hour week on a living wage, you won't qualify for 2-year-old.
No, the funded 2-year-old places are for our lowest 20% of earners in the borough, and usually for those children whose parents are eligible for benefits. The 3-year-old and 4-year-old funding, 15 hours is available for everybody, and then an additional 15 hours is available for working parents if they earn more than £16,000 and earn more than £16,000 and work more than 16 hours a week.
Yeah, so
that's help for those parents.
Wage, you'll be only earning over that amount. You'll be earning £17,308.
Yeah, so they would be entitled to the 30 hours childcare if they were 3 and 4-year-olds.
But they'll be earning over the amount.
Yeah, it's between 16,000 and 100,000 per parent. They would be entitled to 30 hours childcare for 3 and 4-year-olds.
Yeah, no, I was talking about the 2-year-olds.
Yeah, there's no help for 2-year-olds, I'm afraid. No.
No, I thought there was help for 2-year-olds.
There's help for 2-year-olds for the lowest 20% economically, yeah, but not for working parents. There isn't.
Yeah. So if you're on the living wage and you don't qualify, which could be somebody who's working full time, I mean the adult living wage is £8.36 an hour. If you're having to pay between £5 and £7 for childcare, it's hardly worth working, is it?
Yeah, it's the rate. There's a rate that the government pay for a 2-year-old funded place,
yeah. And
then there's the rate that they're all private and voluntary and independent sector mostly. The rate that they pay is the cost to the nursery for providing that childcare.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think through the position of quite a few people in our borough who are on low incomes, maybe on living wage. I mean, that's the adult rate over 22, which is £22.36. If you're a young parent between 18 and 20, you're getting £6.56 an hour.
Yeah.
I mean, most jobs won't give you 2 years of maternity leave.
Right.
So it seems like there's a big gap in provision.
The provision is out there. Whether it's affordable is the question, I think. So yeah, the government at the moment only fund the lowest 20% of 2-year-olds.
And then we have the 30-hour fund. The 30-hour bracket is wider than that. You can earn up to £100,000, can't you? And everybody gets the 15. Okay, so I mean that obviously impacts women probably more than men, I would imagine. About being able to go back to work once you've had children.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard. Even when they go to school, breakfast club is £4.11. After school club is £12.65. So that's £16. I mean, you know, anybody who's had children and used childcare knows that it's not just 8 hours a day that you put your children into childcare. You have to have another couple of hours normally in that day. So £16.76 per child per day, even once they are at school. So
again, that's the average cost. Some schools are much lower. Some are even free if they're in school. But that's the average cost. Of course, you'll have in there a range of much cheaper and much more expensive. When you put it down to an average, obviously you haven't got the range there.
Right, okay. So you would have £4, well, it was around about £5 to £7 an hour from childminders to private provision. So a lot of the childcare is not going to be affordable for every resident.
It tends to be more affordable in school. Schools tend to make it much more affordable once they're at school. Because a lot of after-school clubs will be free. You know, sports clubs, interest clubs, those sorts of things, they don't usually charge for.
So you've got the school holidays then when there isn't that provision. And most people still have to work and people still have to go to work. Okay, so it's quite tough.
Yeah, we would have, of course, for those parents that are eligible for free school meals, their children would be able to access the holiday activities and food provision that's in place during the long holidays, so during Christmas, Easter and the summer.
Okay. Not for anybody who's working full time on the living wage. That's the minimum wage. It's the living wage for adults. Councillor Watson, did you have a question?
Yeah, just sorry. Thank you for the report, Angela. I do appreciate it. Can I talk about the provision? And it's probably not going to do. So it's really great that you've gone through and done it on ward by ward, so you get an idea. One of the wards that's slightly worrying me is last time we talked about 2 closure nurseries getting in Tilbury, St Chad's, and in this report, it needs places and provision. Why we're closing 2 nurseries in St Chad's, if your report just says that it needs provision still in there.
So we're not closing. Michelle, I'm happy for you to take it, and then that's fine.
Thanks, Dan. So when we discussed this last time, what we're looking at is alternative providers to take that provision. And I think, as I reported last time, I was cautiously optimistic. Interestingly, we've just closed the consultation, and the highlight I can give on the consultation, I mean, there's a lot to bring to you because I'm going to do a briefing note, but the highlight I can give you is that what providers have said is they, in that particular area, they are more than happy and have the capability to increase places. So if, and I'm saying if at the moment, as I said, I still remain cautiously optimistic about this because I've had providers contact me and say they're interested, and I said at the last meeting, the difficulty there is there's lots of processes to go through. However, if that doesn't work as we would like it to work, what providers in that local area are saying is that they will be prepared to increase their capacity, and that is just hot off the press. I'm literally pulling all of the consultation responses back as we speak.
Okay, so these numbers in that provision, these numbers in that provision over Tilbury St Chad's, so that includes the provision of those 2 nurseries that the provider might come in as well?
Yes.
And you still need places?
What we haven't got is parents telling us in that area that they can't find childcare. But looking at the numbers, and what we know is in that area, the take-up of 2, 3 and 4-year-old, you can see from the report, is there for you. But what we haven't had is parents coming through to the family information system or through our survey saying that they can't find childcare. What we will be doing over the next coming weeks is looking at the response to the consultation for the nurseries that are out there. But we've got a nursery, so for instance, there's a nursery in that area that's at the moment only got 8 children in it, and they've been advertising, and it doesn't look like anybody wants those spaces, additional spaces at the moment. So whilst it's saying there's a shortage of provision on the numbers, the take-up is low in that area. Nursery take-up is lower in that area. So we're not. If every parent in the area wanted a nursery place, there wouldn't be a nursery place for every parent, but they don't all want one. I think that's the answer to that.
Okay.
So some parents make the decision that actually they don't want their child to go to a nursery. That's the parent's decision. So that's some of the reason. Remember, we're basing it on the numbers that are in that area, but it doesn't mean to say, councillor, that every parent will want a place. And what we're finding at the moment is, so what we've not got at the moment is parents coming through our family information service saying, actually, we're unable to access any provision in that area. And what we know from the consultation, give me some words, what we know from the consultation is if there is a challenge in that area with places going forward, then other providers are happy to increase their places as and when they're required. So I think that's where we are with it at the moment. And forgive me,
because we are losing 126 places with those two nurseries, and obviously at the moment those two nurseries are open. So the fact that you are going to have 126 children or families coming needing a place, so you've got capacity for 126 children.
From what the consultations told us,
right,
providers in that area are happy to open more places if they're required. But I still remain cautiously optimistic that I've got a number of providers who have contacted me to say that they're interested, and actually on the provider consultation there's actually providers that have said we're very interested in taking this forward. And it's difficult to say at this point, colleagues, isn't it, because you know we've got the process, which is what we discussed last time. So, but as I said, I'm going to keep using this term, I'm cautiously optimistic, because there is providers out there who are interested in running that provision.
But there's no guarantees on that. Councillor
Just ask the same question, so the interest is quite high.
The interest is yeah,
I mean,
again,
you gave me your email, pass on to a few nursery managers and
and they've been in touch.
Yeah,
so
that's
again,
right.
it's difficult because I can't talk about that now, because as I said, and I'll keep saying this, but it'll be a process.
So we're going to market in January
Yeah.
with the whole market stuff set up, and the consultation has generated what we consider to be positive interest that looks,
even with the staff being tutored, don't
yeah,
because normally council staff are paid more, aren't they, than the private
sort of
sector.
can't really say too much out loud because you have to wait for it to go to market formally.
Right.
These are people who are just informally saying who we think actually it's viable. What these people say, that until we put it out to market and they formally come back to us, you know, but to be cautiously optimistic here, we think that there is a pool of people out there who want to run these nurseries.
I mean, in a wider sense, obviously looking through the ward-based summaries, we've got 8 out of our 22 wards that have insufficiency of places, and one of them, well, I mean, Chadwell is one of them, so obviously that's very close to my heart. I've got a situation in Chadwell at the moment where I've got a very good nursery that actually serves some of the most deprived families in Chadwell, around the Livingston, and they are at the moment in really inappropriate accommodation, and they have to pack everything away. We've had a nursery right next to them that's been closed down by Ofsted. That building's lying empty and deteriorating, and I basically spent about a year getting the runaround from the council about whether somebody else can move in and take it on that nursery. So to see that there's insufficient spaces in Chadwell makes me quite cross. So I'm going to request that, I mean, I know we've spoken about it more than once. I think it has been going on for about a year now since I made the first request.
And I have got some further information.
Oh,
so,
that's good.
But it's probably better, because you requested that for me, it's probably better that I've got the call to you and just talk that through. So, because there's some issues there that probably I just need to speak to you about. But yeah, I can follow that up. I'm very aware that, you know, that you can find out about that building. So I've got some further information about that building.
Okay. But in a wider sense, 8 out of our 22 wards, that's over a third, have got insufficient childcare spaces going forward. And one of those areas is due to have significant, your ward is due to have significant new developments. I mean, over 2,000. 2,000.
But it's the year twos or there's vision for that. And talking about wood to be sold, which was called provision sitting there.
So
I mean, children's centre isn't open.
that seems like a massive problem.
So part of the reason for this report, as we said, is it enables providers to look at their potential business opportunities. So I think when providers see what's coming, you know, as far as housing, as far as opportunities are concerned, and we'll also be looking at the developments, of course. So as you said, if in phase 2 there's going to be a primary school, then we will be saying very clearly, within that primary school, can you please make sure there's nursery provision as well, so that we've got that sort of like, you know, rounded offer. So I think part of the challenge when you're looking at developments is it's about getting it in at the right time, isn't it? Because, you know, developments take a while to come through. Providers will look at this. This is one of the reasons we have this is a statutory duty on the local authority to provide, because actually it enables providers to say, well, there looks like there's going to be some really good business opportunities there. So actually that's where we need to explore whether or not there's things we can open. So I think as that moves forward, I think you will find that there will be providers out there. Some of our local providers are looking to develop in other areas. Some of our sort of providers that have got a couple of nurseries are looking for other development opportunities. So I think that's why this report, this is really important, because it enables us to be able to say to people, you know, we'll quite often get people in and say, we're interested in developing some childcare provision in Thurrock, and we'll go, have a look at this, then you can see where there's likely to be the demand and the need. So I think in specific areas, some sort of large scale building, then we need to make sure when we're speaking to providers, saying here's a potential opportunity.
I think that's going to be perfect. We're stubborn, to be honest with you, because they're still building out in Lakeside.
I mean, I'm quite concerned about this because I know from reading other reports that 7 out of 10 early years settings had to close due to financial, presumably because of COVID. But presumably we've had a similar kind of rate here. So we can't rely on there being as much provision moving forward. And also there are definite areas in the borough, like Tilbury, for example, is the most deprived area where we're closing the 2 minutes, where it needs to be affordable. So I'm wondering, can private providers provide the affordable, flexible childcare? Will it really be whatever they're providing replace the nurseries that we're running now? Is that they've got a very flexible offer, haven't they?
Yeah. I mean, part of the business model for any sort of childcare business is a mixed economy. So part of what makes them work is you've got some of the funded places, so some of those sort of 2-year funded places, and then you've got places where, you know, you can charge or you do get that additional money. That's what makes them work, that's their business model. So I think there'll always be a mixed economy in relation to that. I think, as Andrea spoke about earlier, one of the things that we're encouraging, and we've seen quite a lot from our schools, is they're developing nursery provision that is taking, you know, the 2-year on, so it's all the way through, which I think actually affords another sort of opportunity about ensuring that, you know, there is enough sort of places in those localities. And I think schools are really keen to do this, of course, because if they're getting children at 2, then they're working with them right the way through their sort of education, their educational, you know, pathways. So I think schools are really interested in doing that, and we're seeing more and more of that sort of coming forward, really. So I think that's going to be another part of the solution, which I think, as you said, Councillor, the important thing here is if we're going to have sort of primary schools, then we need to be building in that sort of nursery capacity as well. And I think schools would welcome that because it does afford them that opportunity.
So this would be like a pre-nursery.
Yeah. So what happens is they take them at the sort of 2-year-olds and take the 2-year-olds and they work their way through. They're with them for 3 and 4. Then they go into sort of like reception in year 1.
I think because of the shock to the market because of COVID and the fact that we've got such a large area of the borough sort of registered in this report as having insufficient places, that I'd like this to come back to the committee.
I'm sorry, can I just, I've had my hand up for a while. I don't think anyone's looking at me. I just wanted to reassure you really, councillors, that we have a member of staff called a Childcare Sufficiency Officer that works with proposed new settings and works with, attends the section 111, I think it's called, that might be 611, around how monies can be spent on provision in the area. But what I would say is we work with any provider that wants to open in Thurrock and use this sufficiency report and also we work to try and find suitable locations and suitable buildings. There aren't many new providers that don't find somewhere to open, and we work with them to make sure they can get through all the Ofsted loopholes to make sure they can find a building that's safe. So any provider that wants to open in the local authority has a lot of support through our Childcare Sufficiency Officer and our early years team. So it's a case of, at the moment, we aren't hearing, well, that we've got nurseries that aren't full, and so we're not in a position where parents are saying they don't have nursery provision. We're in a position where we've got lots of different providers in the market that can meet the needs currently.
Okay, yeah. But the part of having this report is projecting into the future and what places we may need in the future. So I think, you know, maybe you can understand that it's quite concerning to hear that so much of the walk. I don't remember when this report came before, seeing that so much of the borough was actually showing an insufficiency of places. And, you know, I accept that you've got officers that will work with providers. But we've also had COVID, which has been a big shock to the early years market.
It has, but we have provided additional funding through the local authority. Where settings weren't getting the numbers through because the parents weren't sending their children, we still provided a minimum guarantee of funding through our early years funding. So providers got paid on their previous numbers.
Have we got data about providers that have gone out of business because of COVID?
We've had two very small providers. One, we had a notification of this week. She only had 8 children in her setting, and it wasn't financially viable. And another one opened right at the beginning of COVID and never got the numbers, so closed quite quickly. And that was based in a school, that setting. And so, of course, children weren't going to school, so the nursery never really took off. But they're the only 2 providers at the moment that we're aware of that financially couldn't survive, and they would have been providers who wouldn't have survived because they didn't have the numbers for us to give the minimum guarantee to, because they didn't have the numbers beforehand. So none of our providers lost money through the pandemic because we paid that money out of our early years funding.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. Any other questions? Let's move to recommendations. I would like sort of some kind of briefing note to come back on this at some point, just so you can be reassured on the committee that what you're saying about the market will respond and rise to the challenge of the insufficiency of places has actually happened. Just to keep on that. It's probably as a briefing note.
Yes. Yeah. Can I just confirm when you'd like that, Chair? When?
Well, we're talking about from September next year, aren't we? So I suppose it will have to come to February if it's going to be this year's year. Will the data be already sufficient data to.
Yeah, I mean, let's do if it's a briefing note, let's do a briefing note to send round to sort of committee, just to give an update of the position. Yeah,
Yeah.
We can do that.
Because you will have gone out to market in January, so we will know about the 2 nurseries that are potentially closing.
You won't know about the providers until March, will you? Because you have to give like a window of 8 to 12 weeks to get in the process. So that you're not going to get anything until next, basically,
But maybe a briefing note could come in.
who's wanting to.
Obviously, that's of interest to committee, so once we've been through that process.
And if you just do expression of interest, this is annually, you know, well, annually, you can't tell them until it be done.
No, we can do that.
You wait
Okay, so if there's no more questions, let's move to the recommendations. One recommendation that you review and approve the annual childcare sufficiency assessment 2020. Agreed.
Thanks, Andrea.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. I don't know if you want to, you're very welcome to stay.
I won't if you don't mind. I've got a dog with very crossed legs.
Yeah, that's fine. If you want to go, that's fine.
Thank you very much.
Here we go. Okay, and Joe is coming just at the right moment. So we're moving on to item 7, low-income families and child poverty updates 2021 for the children and young people's JSNA product 2017. This is on pages 75 to 88 in the agenda. Joe, can you present your report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll just give a brief overview because obviously you've got the draft update in your paperwork. So what we've done, we've looked at the section of the JSNA report from 2017 around child poverty and updated both the policy context and the data around child poverty. I would say the update presents a mixed picture. There have been some real improvements. So, for example, one of the key determinants of children living in poverty is living in a workless household. And although children living in workless households are slightly higher as a proportion in Thurrock than is average for England, that has gone down from 19% in 2010 to just over 10% in 2019, which is almost halving. So there have been some improvements, although there are some areas of concern still. So just to start with the policy context, the targets that were set out in the Child Poverty Act have been overridden in 2016 by the Welfare Reform and Work Act. So the government has stopped measuring the former measure of child poverty, which is either families in receipt of out-of-work benefits or working families with income less than 60% of the national median. And these have been replaced by 4 targets in the Social Mobility Action Plan, which are much more focused on educational attainment and helping young people achieve their potential through rewarding careers. So that's closing the word gap in the early years, closing the attainment gap in school while continuing to raise standards overall, high quality post-16 education and supporting young people into rewarding careers. So that policy context has changed since the previous report was written. However, the Social Mobility Commission have published data this year on measures of child poverty, which show that if we measure it as absolute poverty, which is 60% of the median income in 2010 adjusted for inflation, that has actually reduced in Thurrock slightly, although it does mean we still have over 5,000 children in Thurrock living in poverty. So although absolute poverty is reduced, relative low income has increased, over the same period slightly, which suggests that although the numbers have gone down, that inequality in income in the area has gone up slightly. So that's sort of what I mean by it's a slightly mixed picture. We've had some gains, but there are some areas where we could go further. In terms of the previous child poverty plan, which ran from 2015 to 2020, there's actually been quite a lot of successes in terms of that plan. So I've already mentioned the reduction in children in workless households, also reduction in the number of young people who are not in education, employment or training, which is now just 1.6% in Thurrock. There's been a number of service developments as well, such as the development of joint working with the Job Centre Plus as part of the Brighter Futures Early Help, introduction of multi-agency planning of services and co-location, and introduction of a service targeted at preventing homelessness in young people. So there has actually been substantial action taken in that 5-year period. And if you look at the new policy measures that I mentioned, actually Thurrock largely does quite well when measured against those 4 national measures. So I think in terms of child poverty, there have been some improvements, but there is obviously much more we can do and further to go. And I'll probably stop there, Chair.
Thank you for that report. Anybody got any questions? Any questions about child poverty? Really? No. Okay. In terms of the new programme, obviously the government's abolished the Child Poverty Act, but clearly it hasn't abolished child poverty, because the latest report from the Social Mobility Unit, is it, has shown that child poverty has risen by 500,000, so 500,000 in England alone, 700,000 across the UK since 2012. So nearly 1 in 3 children in the UK now live in poverty, so around 4.3 million children living in poverty. Joe, can you sort of speak a little bit to what the effects are of a child who grows up in poverty? What kind of things does that affect in their lives?
Yes, so growing up in poverty affects a range of, well, access to opportunities firstly, and also outcomes for children, and we often see this intergenerational disadvantage. So growing up in poverty, often those children will grow up to be adults living in poverty and have families of their own suffering disadvantage. We know that children in high areas of deprivation experience a range of poorer outcomes, such as a higher risk of infant mortality, a whole range of poorer health status and outcomes. And we know that they're likely to have poorer outcomes potentially in their teenage years, higher rates of teenage pregnancy, higher rates of risky behaviours, etc., poorer educational qualifications potentially, which lead on to lower earnings, which then perpetuates that intergenerational cycle. So it's quite key to work, I think, on supporting families in terms of their whole well-being, supporting parents into meaningful and well-paid work. That will be the support the whole family in terms of improving those intergenerational outcomes, I would say.
In terms of the plan for tackling poverty from the DFE, so the Social Mobility Action Plan, this is a plan for improving social mobility through education. Is it possible to tackle child poverty just through education, or does there need to be more elements to that plan?
I mean, I would say this relates very much to the next agenda item and the health and wellbeing strategy, which takes a very broad approach to addressing inequality in the borough across a range of factors. So broader strategies to addressing, say, economic development. It's important that we consider that all members of the community should benefit from those types of strategies to benefit those families most in need. So it is quite a broad-based approach, I suspect, that is needed to make a step change in this. That said, making such a step change across such a broad area is challenging, but the health and wellbeing strategy does aim to do that. So I would say it's that kind of broad approach that's required, probably.
A lot of the data, as you say in this report, is pre-COVID, and we've had COVID, and so the report, the State of the Nation report, is the most recent data that we've got on this issue, even though it's not specific to Thurrock. Presumably we are co-applicated with the rest of the country. Can you sort of run through what the recommendations were for that report that we should be doing?
Chair, can I just interject? This has got absolutely nothing to do with what we're supposed to be discussing here. We're supposed to be discussing this new chapter that's supposed to go into the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment.
Yeah, but which references this report that I'm talking about?
But we're talking about this in relation to Thurrock. We're not talking about this in relation to government policy.
Councillor Snell, I really have to ask you to. We're a scrutiny committee. We've got a report.
Doesn't mean to say you can shut me up though. But we're supposed to be talking about this Appendix 1. That's it.
Okay, you've had your say. Joe, can you answer the question, please?
Yeah. That's it. You're shutting me down. Is that what you're doing?
I'm not shutting you down. You've had your say.
You don't agree.
A question about a report.
You don't agree that we're supposed to be discussing recommendations 1.1.
Councillor Snell, you're the vice chair of this committee.
Yes, I'm trying to bring it back onto subject. So you're going wild.
The report that I'm talking about is the most recent data, and it is included in this report.
We're talking about Thurrock, though. This is what we're meant to be discussing. Thurrock.
We haven't got specific data. We're talking about the most recent data that's coming through.
Data in this report here in front of us regarding Thurrock, which is what we're supposed to be discussing. We're not talking about government policy.
Okay, well, we'll have to agree to disagree, Councillor Snell. Joe, could you ask the question, please?
I must admit, I haven't got this report up in front of me. I've just got the highlights that we pulled up for this report. So I would probably have to come back to you with something a bit more comprehensive on exactly what it is they're recommending that would be relevant to what we might want to do in Thurrock. To be honest, I don't think I can give you a full answer right now.
Okay, could you say, from your knowledge of the report and from the headline items that you've got, what that means for Thurrock?
So as I said, I think it's about how we support those families living in the most deprived circumstances across a broad range of areas to improve generally their economic well-being, and also specifically targeting well-being for children. So things like free school meals, for example, those types of initiatives that target children living in disadvantage are quite important. So I think there's probably a range of things that already do address child poverty quite actively, but there's probably further things that we could do through, say, the backing Thurrock agenda, like the economic growth agenda, to really make sure that those initiatives do target those families living in the most deprived circumstances. So it's probably, like I said, quite a broad brush approach. I think it's not just about education, although that's very important. I think there's a broader range of things we could do, such as food poverty, tackling that kind of issue.
Obviously, you've seen through the pandemic that's been a very real issue for a lot of families in the local area. In terms of the Brighter Futures strategy, can you say a little bit more? Is that totally based in education, or does that have a wider impact?
Michelle may be a slightly better place to address that than me, but certainly from my knowledge it's addressing a key range of issues that affect children, including education, but from that best start in life in terms of health and well-being, through safety, community safety, mental health, and that sort of wider well-being. So it's a broad range of issues that the Brighter Future strategy addresses.
I think she was going to respond to that.
I chair the Brighter Strategies Board. It's a multi-agency board, so it's broader than just what the council provides. It's across all agencies, and we have very good representation on the board. So the actual strategy itself is broken down into key priorities, and it does include things like education, mental health, which I think there's 4 or 5 priorities that we've got there, and we have them led by an agency that's leading on each of those, and it is about improving the rights of children, young people in the authority. But from all perspectives, from schools, from health, from police, from children's services, from the voluntary sector, we've got early years providers there. So we have a whole range of public health, we have a whole range of agencies that feed into that, and then we report on that at each meeting.
And what impact have you seen from COVID?
I think it's a variety of impacts. So if you think of the children's social care we talked about earlier, we had a reduction in referrals coming through. So that's about where are children being seen and who are seeing those children who may not surface at that point. So what we found in social care is we were getting to know about children in crisis rather than before the crisis arose, because they're quite often being seen by schools or other agencies who can make referrals in. Obviously there's an issue about missing education, how much education some children have missed, and how able some families are to educate and make sure children can catch up. Our early years providers, as I think Andrew referred to earlier, they were funded during that period of time, but children weren't always in it, so they missed out on socialisation, just the building blocks that we've all come to expect for children and their lives. For some parents, they may have been more isolated because services were not open, so they couldn't just go to a children's centre and talk to someone. Sometimes those issues then would escalate. Mental health has been an absolute critical issue through COVID. Again, that's about people feeling the pressure of the isolation and things not being normal, so not being able to go to school, or not being able to go out and meet friends, or go to shopping, even go to a centre. So it's really very broad brush.
Okay. Because I mean, it's all very well sort of having a strategy that focuses on education, but if you can't afford to give your child breakfast, it's difficult for your child to learn when they go to school. So I mean, there needs to be a whole range of things that are feeding into it. So
absolutely, and I think one of the things certainly that we've done that happened in COVID that's still happening now is for those children entitled to free school meals, the vouchers have been provided during all the holidays, and we have funding now, and we've covered the October half term. We have funding for Christmas, and we have funding for February and going into Easter as well. We've also got the holiday activity fund, which is allowing for children and young people to have some activities and something to do, as well as a lunch while they're at that activity. So there has been some focus on, and we also had some funding just recently around the providing extra funding for families who might be struggling during this time, and we have put money into the it's titled ELF, which I think is the Early Living Essential Living Fund. So we put extra money in there so that families can apply direct to that fund to get support with, whether it be food. It also covers things like heating, lighting, that sort of thing, that we know families who are already struggling, may find difficult. So that's funding that's come from the government to the council that we put into those areas to make sure that our vulnerable families don't have to worry about, will my child have a meal today? Can I put heating on?
how long does it take for an application to the Essential Living Fund to get processed?
I understand it's relatively quick. We can get you details on that, but I do understand it's relatively quick, and we have spoke with the Essential Living Fund, because that's where it's administered, being clear that this is money that's come through to help families now in crisis, and you can access it on the you can access it on the Thurrock website, or it's on, on the Thurrock Council website. There'll be information on that, and you can access the forms that you need to fill in. Because it is designed for people who are, you know, if you suddenly think, I need some support with this bill I've just had, you know, it's not meant to take weeks. I've certainly seen that it's days turnaround rather than weeks.
And what are we seeing in terms of food bank usage? Have you got any data on that?
I haven't got data on that.
Have you got any data on that, Julie? Food bank usage?
Oh, not to hand. I'd have to go and look for it, I'm afraid.
Yeah. It's just I had an inquiry just before I came in of a family that's been waiting for quite a while for the Essential Living Fund. Yeah, so
if you want to speak to us after, we'll follow that up. They shouldn't wait for a long time. That's the whole point of it. It's meant to be something that's quite quick, and we put. But this council has put additional funding in to cover Thurrock families that are finding themselves in that sort of crisis. So we'll follow that up definitely.
Councillor Watson.
Suspends
Half 8.
Half 9 we're going to, aren't we?
Yes, but it's 2.5 hours into the meeting and we'll suspend our orders since we started to be able to pay.
Oh, okay. Do you think you'll need the extra time for the last report?
Well, if it's everything's done in 12 minutes, then we don't have to suspend standing orders.
It's only 7:30. We're going to.
No, the meetings have got time in it, haven't they? So.
Yeah,
What,
meetings
started
are
at
general.
6?
Oh, I thought we were still going until 9:30.
Yeah, we want, so
Oh, right,
suspend
okay.
it now
Got
till
right.
half 9. Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to move a motion without notice to suspend council procedure rule 11.1 to allow the meeting to continue beyond the 2.5 hour time limit. Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. We've still got plenty of time.
Right, Joe,
Councillor Watson.
can you hear me? The insert of the JSNA, like the actual appendices yourself, that's what we're talking about. In terms of this, I was under the assumption that JSNA is a document that is a rolling document every single year. But this is like for 2017.
It's more of a process to produce a range of documents. So we have a suite of JSNA products that cover a whole raft of different things. So in the past year, we've completed products on breastfeeding, maternal obesity, active travel, all sorts of different topics. So it's not one thing, and it's not looking at one thing every single year. We just wouldn't have the capacity to do that. So we sort of have a rolling programme.
So the thing is, I'm trying to get back to on this, is I'm assuming that the other JSNAs that are in, like economic development JSNA, housing JSNA, public health one, all of that feeds into the child poverty. So we get the actions that we are seeing that we've improved in one of these is through the rest of the JSNA's success. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, a range of JSNAs and council policies are probably relevant here and feed into this particular plan, yeah.
Sorry, it's just getting my head. So this JSNA is more around about, obviously, attainment, closing the gap, deeper knowledge, schooling, SENs, all of that sort of stuff. So you're happy. This is what this is about, this part. I'm just trying to get in my head. Child poverty for me is so much more than just this. So I just wanted to know, is it picked up in other GSNAs, in other committees that we don't need to know about, but they are also addressing it?
To some extent, so the connections are made. So, for example, we've done a review of worklessness and health, which is obviously relevant to this because worklessness is a key driver for child poverty. So they are interrelated, yeah.
One other thing, so in terms of the SOAs, it's quite out of date that the Department of DCLG has gave you. Is there a way we could update that at all? Because it would be really good to see the reflection now, 3 years on.
So a lot of the high level indicators, so the IDACI index that we've got here, because they are an amalgamation of a number of different data sets that are produced over a different time period, there's generally a time lag in a lot of these high level data sets. So we wouldn't have, say, the 2001 data for this because it would take time to produce that amalgamated data set. So it may be that more up-to-date data will be produced soon, but this work was done in the past few months, so the team will have used the most up-to-date data that we've got access to.
Okay. And I'm assuming there'll be an action plan that pulls out of here. Yeah, Sheila? Is there an action? Sorry, or Michelle, or anyone? Is there an action plan that pulls out of there of what the JSNA covers in order for children, like you will pick up for attainment and schools and everything else?
Should take it.
Yeah.
Schools.
Yeah,
So,
I can come back to it.
so that work is picked up in the Brighter Futures strategy.
Right.
So in the Brighter Futures strategy, chapter 1 is all of those things. Absolutely all of those things. And you know, so that's where that's picked up. That's picked up in the Brighter Futures strategy. Yeah.
I will get the Brighter Futures strategy.
Yeah.
If that's all right, that'd be great.
Of course.
I think that's what I was going to suggest.
Yeah,
Is that the
yes,
Brighter,
please.
we haven't brought the Brighter Future strategy
Yeah.
so
That's about here.
if you wanted that, you know, it's a very comprehensive strategy and it's been refreshed last year, so it's in a good position at the minute. So,
Okay. Okay.
or maybe we could send a copy out. I'll make sure that Grace has
If
that.
you just send it a
out.
copy, then
Yeah.
bring it in here, and then it's up to the committee what they want. What we need. But okay, thanks, Joe. Thank you.
So in your report, Joe, just finally, unless anybody else has got any questions. You say that it's extremely likely that school closures due to COVID-19 have exacerbated the attainment gap. I know I've read in the report that we've probably lost up to 2/3 of the progress that we've made over the last decade on the attainment gap.
I mean, yeah, it will undoubtedly have had an impact. We know from national research that's been done that children living in more deprived circumstances find it much more difficult to do remote learning, which is bound to have an impact. I think it'll take, some time to actually quantify this, but yeah, undoubtedly there'll be an impact.
Okay, thank you, Joe, for your report. Thank you. Any other councillors want to discuss child poverty?
Chair, it's not a case of not discussing child poverty. It's just a case of the report is actually an appendix which is replacing section 6 or portion chapter 6 in a whole document, and it's specifically about Thurrock. We don't want to discuss child poverty, it's just that we've been talking about things which are not very related until just recently.
Well, Thurrock's part of the UK, so they are quite related in that way. Okay, let's move to the recommendations. 1.1, the committee are asked to consider and comment on the content of the updated chapter for the Children's Joint Strategic Needs Assessment Project. And 1.2, the committee are asked to agree that this updated chapter is added to the published document.
Agreed.
Okay, let's move on to the final item, Joe. The Thurrock Health and Wellbeing Strategy refresh on pages 89 to 120.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see this okay. Can you see that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to go through a brief slide set that gives an overview of the refresh of the health and wellbeing strategy that we're undertaking at the moment. Apologies, I know some people in the room have seen this before, so bear with me as I go through it again. We're in the middle of our engagement process on the strategy, and my purpose in bringing this to the committee today is to really ask for your input and feedback on what we've included in the strategy, but also gaps, issues that we could pull out more. So your feedback on that would be really helpful. I'm going to give a high level overview of the purpose of the health and wellbeing strategy, our vision, which is about levelling the playing field, and I think is quite relevant to the discussion we've just had about child poverty. I'm going to give a high level overview of what the domains of the strategy are proposed to be, something about outcomes and how we measure progress, and then a little bit about how we're engaging with stakeholders in the community. So the health and wellbeing strategy, as you know, is one of the 2 highest level strategic documents that drive placemaking within the borough alongside the local plan. The Health and Wellbeing Board has a statutory duty to produce a health and wellbeing strategy, and because it's a statutory document, it's quite a strong lever we have in working with NHS and health partners in particular, because they have a requirement to take account of health and wellbeing strategies in determining their strategies. So it's an important and key strategy for the council and for the borough. The Health and Wellbeing Board agreed the vision of levelling the playing field, and this very much not only references the national agenda around levelling up, but it also pays reference to those intergenerational health inequalities that persist in Thurrock that we've just been talking about. And we know that the opportunities for every resident to reach their full potential are not shared equally, and that there's variation in access to services, in outcomes across health, education, and a whole range of areas that impact on health. So that's why levelling the playing field was the topic that was chosen. Just to say a little bit more about inequality in Thurrock. So Thurrock experiences inequalities both when compared to England, and also within the borough itself. Our high level health inequality measure that we use in public health is life expectancy, and we do see considerable variation in life expectancy. So if we compare life expectancy in Thurrock to the England average, it is well below the England average in Thurrock. And if we think about healthy life expectancy, which is how long a person can expect to live in good health, healthy life expectancy for women in Thurrock is significantly lower than the England average, and that's what this graph here on the left is showing. This line at the bottom is the Thurrock line. And if we think about the comparison between different groups within Thurrock, there's a 9-year life expectancy gap for men and a 6-year life expectancy gap for women between the most and least affluent areas of the borough. And if we think about healthy life expectancy again, women in the most affluent areas can experience 8 years more healthy life than those in the most deprived, and women living in those most deprived areas can expect to experience 22 years of their shorter life in poor health. And we see a similar but less extreme pattern for men. We also see differences in life expectancy between a whole range of groups in the communities based on disability, ethnicity, and a range of health status, such as people with poor mental health, for example. So this plays out in a number of ways, and it's quite complex to address. But there is good evidence about how we can, what does impact on our health and wellbeing status as individuals and as a community. So we do know where we should be focusing. This diagram here is taken from a report from the King's Fund, and they've pulled together the range of research that's been done on what drives our health status, and they've grouped this into 4 different categories. So the first is our health, our behaviours and lifestyle. So that includes things like our age, but also those health behaviours like how much physical activity we take, our diet, for example. Our health status is also affected by the places and communities we live in. So that's not just the built environment, but also things like community resilience and the strength of the communities we live in. An integrated health and care system is, of course, part of the factors that influence health, but actually out of the four, this is the one with the least impact on overall health status. And the really big one is the wider determinants of health. And so these include the things that we were just talking about in relation to child poverty. So things like income, having good and meaningful employment, access to high quality housing, good quality education and the best start in life in general. Also the built environment, the green environment, our transport access, active travel, and the strength of the communities we live in. These all impact on our health. And I've just identified on the right here some of these big strategic projects that Thurrock has going on, that touch on some of these wider determinants, such as the Backing Thurrock Agenda, the Freeport, the South Essex Estuary Park. And I think what we would really like to do, working with colleagues working on other big strategies, is make sure we weave these drivers of health and wellbeing status through these other big strategies, because this is how we're going to make the step change we need to narrow that life expectancy gap and level the playing field across a range of these wider determinants. So that was a wide range of things that I talked about. So to make this hopefully slightly manageable, we've divided the areas we want to focus on into 6 domains for the health and wellbeing strategy. We've aligned these to each of the council's priorities of people, place and prosperity. And I'll briefly go through each of these now, but what I'll try and do is indicate where these overlap with the Brighter Future strategy in particular, because this is obviously where it impacts on children and young people the most. And just before I do that, just to explain how we're kind of viewing how the strategies relate to each other. So the health and wellbeing strategy, by its nature, is very broad and therefore is very high level. So we see this as being a broad high level strategy with more specific strategies feeding into it. So the delivery details for many of the goals in the health and wellbeing strategy will be in these other more specific strategies. And in relation to children, that's particularly the Brighter Future strategy. So we very much tried to align the goals in the Brighter Future strategy with the goals in the health and wellbeing strategy. So just to go through all the domains, so on the left hand side of the next 6 slides, these are the high level goals that we're proposing as part of the consultation, and the ones in red are the ones where there are key links to health and wellbeing for children and young people and the Brighter Future strategy. They may be sort of termed using slightly different wording, but actually they are very much aligned. So the first domain is about staying healthier for longer, so supporting individuals to be as healthy as they can, and that applies to children just as much as it does to adults. And we know that the best start in life is one of the key determinants of future health. So the first goal is around smoking and obesity. Both of these apply to our children and young people. We know that most smokers start smoking by the age of 15. We know that obesity in year 6 children is higher in Thurrock than in many places in England. So these are key considerations for children, and certainly obesity management is one of the key goals in the Brighter Future strategy. We want to generally work together in partnership to improve health, promote good health, prevent ill health, and that applies to children just as much as adults. And the strategic priority 2 of the Brighter Future strategy is very much about that. It's about promoting good health and healthcare for children. And so the next one around identification and management of long-term conditions again fits very much in that Brighter Futures priority. So look, we'd be considering things like childhood asthma, for example, under that priority. And we've already mentioned the impact that COVID has had on our children and young people, whether that's educational attainment, mental health, access to outside spaces, physical activity. So we want to make sure we narrow that gap as much as possible as well. The second domain is very much built around the work of the Stronger Together Thurrock Alliance, and their work has very much shaped these goals. So this is largely about supporting residents to engage, to have their voices heard, to have the confidence and ability to contribute as active citizens and influence decision making. And the third priority here is about promoting opportunities to bring different communities together, enhance shared experience and a sense of belonging. And again, this aligns very much to the ethos of the Brighter Future strategy. I think the words may differ, but very much about that the mental health strategic priority, I think very much aligns with this in the Brighter Futures strategy about positive experiences for children. The third domain is mostly, but not entirely, about adult health and care. So we are, just like we've produced a Brighter Future strategy for children's wellbeing, we're working on an adult health and care strategy, and so this is a very high level summary of what will be in that strategy in much more detail. But of course some of this still plays into the care for children, so access to primary care responsiveness applies very much to children and young people, just as it does to adults and older members of the community. Domain 4 is a very broad domain, and I think in a very key way relates to the Brighter Future strategy in relation to education. So opportunity for all arguably starts at birth, or even before birth, I would say. But we focused here with our first goal on raising aspirations and reducing the disadvantage gap so that all Thurrock children, young people are able to achieve their potential. And that is completely aligned with the aims of the Brighter Futures strategy, particularly around that education focused strategic priority. This domain as well, though, is also focused on the economic growth aspect. So the Backing Thurrock plan is part of the goals here, and that relates back to the discussion on child poverty in terms of wellbeing for more deprived families and how we can support them through the overall economic growth of the borough. Domain 5 focuses on housing and the environment. So this is very much about provision of high quality, safe housing for all residents within Thurrock, reducing homelessness, and that includes reducing the risk of homelessness for young people, which was something that was in the child poverty strategy, the last iteration of it. And then these last two goals here align very much with the local plan work, the town's plans, the regeneration activity that is going on in Thurrock, and how we can use particularly the design principles for all of that work to build in opportunities to be more physically active, to promote mental well-being, to improve air quality, and also address more slightly nuanced things like building community resilience and reducing the fear and risk of crime through the built environment. And then finally, the last domain is community safety. This is aligned very much with the community safety partnership priorities, with the youth violence and vulnerability aims and ambitions, and also Brighter Futures, again with enabling all children to live safely in their communities, to reduce the risk of crime for children and young people, to reduce the risk of them becoming a victim or indeed a perpetrator of crime, and making Thurrock generally a safer place to live. We'll have an outcomes framework that will allow us to measure progress against our goals, and again what we will seek to do in terms of children and young people is aligned very much with those ambitions in the Brighter Future strategy. So we're measuring the same aspirations, we're working towards those same goals, so we will be linking up very much with those. And then finally, just a bit about our community and stakeholder engagement. So this process will be running through to the end of December. We've realised we can't fit in all the engagement we want to do by the start of December, so we're going to extend that period slightly. And we're doing 4 things. Firstly, of course, we have a site on the council's engagement portal, and the link is there, and I would encourage you to please give your feedback by going through that link if you want to give more detailed feedback. We are working very closely with Health Watch and the CVS, who are very much the front line of our public facing engagement. They are asking questions about health and wellbeing priorities as part of all the work they are doing in the community at the moment. So linking up with a huge range of groups within the community. So that includes children's centres, for example. I know they've been out to various places like that. We are going to hold workshops for individuals who want to talk in more detail about any of the particular areas. And the final thing of which this presentation is part is we're going to as many different groups and meetings as we can. So we're going to all the overview and scrutiny committees, but we're also going to community groups, the Disability Forum, NHS clinical meetings, NHS patient group meetings, and talking to people about the areas of the health and wellbeing strategy that are of most interest to that group. So that's the overview, and I just welcome any comments on what we've included in the strategy and any gaps that you think we have that we should be building into our thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo, for that report. Can I just say it might have been handy to actually have the slides from your overview to look at, because all we had here really was a very short report with not much detail and just the sort of marketing bits and pieces. The recommendation is that we note the consultation exercise, consider and propose opportunities to engage the public and interested parties during the consultation period. I mean, not being one to stifle debate, I'm quite willing for us to have a wider discussion and for people to ask questions around in a wider way around the health and wellbeing strategy. So please do all feel free to do that.
I can share my slides with you. That's not a problem. Maybe Grace could send them round to the group afterwards.
Have a bit more on that to scrutinise sort of in preparation for the meeting. Has anybody got any questions?
I have spoken with the boss just recently, so I really want to go before me.
There's no need to speak if you don't want to speak.
That's fine.
I think she's sending the presentation.
Oh, right, okay.
I get the sense.
Jo.
Sorry.
We spoke about this at HOSP recently, and one of the comments made was that the actual the questionnaire that comes with this was very unwieldy and difficult to deal with. There were some recommendations made about maybe making it a bit shorter and a little bit more accessible. Has any work been done on that at all yet, do you know?
So we are looking at some of the wording on the website that came up at that meeting. Yeah.
Okay. Any moves to sort of shrink it a little bit, make it less sort of cumbersome and unwieldy? Because it's a very, very long survey. There's lots of questions, and as we said at the time, it's officer speak, not human.
So we took the view to divide it into sections by domain because it was so broad, but the first bit that you come to on the website is a very high level overview, and it basically says, do you think we're looking at the right priorities? Gives a list, like a tick box list of things that people can select that they think are priorities for them. So the first bit that you come to is actually quite general. And then it gets more specific as you go further down. So we've had quite a lot of responses, I think 65, I think at the last count, to that first general bit, which our engagement colleagues tell me is very good for an online consultation. So yeah, but the more specific bits have obviously had fewer responses.
Jo, I mean, I have to agree with Councillor Snell that perhaps it's the nature of the strategy, because it is a big overarching strategy, that it seems a bit nebulous, and I'm just wondering, and it does seem like not, how would a normal person understand it? That's the point of view that I'm trying to go from, and I'm not sure, thinking of the average person that I deal with in terms of my councillor ward casework, will engage with this. I mean, obviously there is a paper consultation which is at the heart, and some people have taken that to fill out. But I'm wondering how accessible this is to sort of the ordinary man and woman on the streets.
Yeah, so it is quite.
Really.
Yeah, it is quite high level and technical because of sort of the breadth of it. But this is what you're highlighting is exactly the reason we've been working with Health Watch and the CVS. So what they are going out with is something quite different. They basically have 3 questions that they're asking people about what is important to them, what is important to them in terms of their health and well-being, and asking much more straightforward and simpler questions, engaging people through the work that they're already doing with communities. So all the community builders, for example, that are out and about working with the communities are gathering feedback, and then the Health Watch are pulling it all together into their sort of Airtable database, and then they will give us an output of all this engagement with members of the public at the end of the period. So that's why very much they are our sort of public facing element of the engagement, because they're the experts at this. They know how to do that.
Just before Councillor Tandy and then Councillor Bowen, can I say, because this is the questionnaire, isn't it? The questions here that is in a paper form that I've seen in the hub. It looks like it anyway.
Yeah, so we've got some paper questionnaires that we're taking to various places.
Yeah, would it be better to go out with those kind of questions on the questionnaire that goes out to the hubs? You know, what are the 3 areas that are most important for you in terms of health? I mean, I can pretty much tell you what most people's reply will be. GP surgeries will definitely, not being able to get an appointment at the GP will definitely come up. In my ward, certainly. That is something I could imagine an ordinary person answering. So that's my comment on that particular material. I think it would have been better to just keep it simple and ask those questions to collect that meaningful data, because I don't think most people are going to understand what you're asking for.
Okay.
Councillor Tandy.
I think one of the ones it was in the national paper as well, the air quality in Thurrock. I think we're 6th worst in the country. Does that come up quite a bit? Like the air quality?
So of the feedback we've had on the website so far, air quality is the thing that has been mentioned most. Yes, absolutely.
What's the solution for that? Is it?
Air quality is a really tricky one to address because it's so multifactorial, and weather doesn't, respect geographical boundaries. It's a really difficult one. Public Health works very closely with the environment team on this. We at the moment don't have an air quality monitoring officer within the council. It's been very hard for the team to recruit someone. So although we have 18 air quality monitoring zones, we haven't got the most up-to-date data even in which to base an updated air quality strategy. So it is quite a difficult one. It obviously is a big concern and impact of a lot of the development that's going on in the borough. So the Lower Thames Crossing, for example, we have commissioned an impact assessment of those proposals, and obviously air quality is one of the things that gets brought into that type of work. So it is addressed in a number of ways through environmental permitting. There's a lot of activity that addresses this, but because it's a really complex issue to really pin down air quality, I have to say. It's probably one of the most difficult areas that my team work with other teams in the council on in terms of making an impact.
And the other one was life expectancy. Why are we so the lowest in the average of England?
Again, a really good question, and it's partly that intergenerational issue. It's partly ongoing deprivation, but we also, for example, have one of the highest smoking rates in the country, and one of the key drivers of premature death is smoking that plays out through a variety of long-term health conditions. We have a high rate of obesity, higher than the national average. 7 in 10 people in Thurrock are either overweight or obese, which is very high compared to other areas. So it is quite multifactorial, which is why the health and wellbeing strategy is of necessity so broad.
Thank you.
Councillor Hondo.
Thank you. My first question is that I don't think we are helping the young people enough, and many people that are overweight, and I don't know how the government can help, because walking enough or speaking to them is not enough to help them with their problems. For example, now all the gyms that are available are very expensive, and we know the people that are mostly affected by obesity are people that are from deprived area. So if gym costs about £50 or £40, the government one is £40 a month, obviously they will not be able to afford it. That's number one. Another pandemic that we have right now is high streets that are full with fast food restaurants. And the most major issue that we have now is this home delivery motorcyclists and cars, which were not happening before the COVID pandemic. But since COVID, I've seen quite a lot of motorcycles and these deliveries, vans and vehicles going from one place to the other to deliver food. So it becomes easier to order fast food. So I don't know what you can do within your capacity in those areas.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it is an enduring issue, obesity within Thurrock. We are doing 2 things currently. Well, we're doing a number of things currently. So we have a weight management service that is funded by the public health team. So we will fund people to do 12 weeks of Slimming World, for example. That's a service that we commission all of the time. We've got extra funding this year in recognition partly of the impact of COVID on obesity levels and physical activity levels. We've got additional funding, so we've funded a whole range of different activity and weight management approaches throughout the borough. So we're making gym memberships available to those who are eligible, and we'll be doing that for the rest of the year, for example, and lots of different types of physical activity, because obviously people have different preferences. So we are trying to tackle that. We've also set some money aside. We got money to respond to the COVID pandemic. We haven't spent all of it, so we put some aside to address health needs that have got worse because of the pandemic. And we funded a whole range of things, one of which is a children's weight management and physical activity intervention. And so that's something that will be getting in place soon as well. But how to fund these on an ongoing basis when a lot of it is sort of a 1-year grant from the government is quite challenging. But we're trying to do as much as we can at the moment.
Now, the second one is the shops that are full of restaurants. Is there any way the council can come in by not giving many shops this license of opening fast food?
Well, I do know that that is what a lot of some councils have done, and particularly focusing on new fast food outlets near to schools. So that particular focus on young people, again, I think that's something we'd need to think about as a council if we wanted to adopt that policy, but it's certainly something that has been done in other areas.
Thank you.
Last comment.
Yes, Councillor Snow.
Yeah, all it is, I think looking at the strategy in its entirety, I think is actually a good and sensible and achievable strategy. I think actually, you know, you read through it and it is quite, it's a good strategy, and there's lots of, if we can get anywhere near that, we'll bring a sort of good sense of achievement. I think the problem is, and where it falls down, is on the public engagement with it. And I think we've mentioned it before, is that when we're asked to comment on the opportunities being paid to the public, then I think it's a fail from what we've been given here tonight. Now I know Health Watch are doing their own thing, but it is actually their own thing. They've actually placed this, and I think when they were speaking to me the other night, they just took one page and they were asking questions on that. So I think as a council document, it's a failure, and I think we really do need to learn that if we're going to engage with the public, it needs to be a lot more clear and succinct and a lot shorter. I mean, dealing with shorter questions, maybe even with tick boxes, where you've asked a question and given a range of options to tick box from. People might be more willing to engage with that. I think as it is, in this particular way, it's a fail, unfortunately. But the strategy itself is good.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I think well, all of us, but particularly the public health team, not been dealing with the COVID pandemic for the past 18 months, we would have started the strategy refresh a whole year before we did, and we would have started with a very different type of engagement. So I know that the Brighter Future strategy, for example, did a lot of engagement with young people through a variety of mechanisms. It was a really impressive engagement approach, actually, that they used. And had we had more time, we would have done something more similar. So I am blatantly making an excuse here, but unfortunately this isn't a perfect approach that we would have taken had we had more time to do it.
Fair enough.
Councillor Watson.
Sorry, just one for me, because I do agree with everything that Councillor Snow's just said, but what is the timeline on this?
So we are engaging through to the end of December. We're going to start writing the document in December, and then we are taking a first draft to the Health and Wellbeing Board in January. It will then go through various other council committees with a final sign off by the Health and Wellbeing Board in March, then a final sign off from full council in June. So there's actually not that much time. June sounds like it's ages away, but by the time we've been through all the statutory processes, so that's the timeline.
Please, Joe, but so all the things that you've just said are a council governance, isn't it? All council governance that you've got to go through various boards. So because it's council governance and because this is such an important strategy and it's not going out the way we want it to go out, and Councillor Snell's made the point and everybody else around the table has, that what is the reason then to stop saying, well, you know what, we'll bring it in September. So we shift the timeline, because we're not on a timeline to go back to government, are we? Or to go anywhere else. We're on our own timeline in order to get a proper consultation done, because the housing strategy consultation that was taking place, they went to the forums in our respective wards, to each forum, and it was really well received. And it got to the heart of those people, especially the chairs and the vice chairs of those forums. They are the spokespeople for that ward 9 out of 10 times. They will go out and they will spread your word for you. So there's an option there, because the housing strategy has done that role. Why can't this do that role as well? So
we would have to take that back. Yeah, so I can take that back to the Health and Wellbeing Board and consider that. It has already been pushed back once. We were due to have this signed off in December, which just was completely unachievable. So we have already pushed it back by almost 6 months. And the current strategy runs out this December. So the gap between strategies just grows, I guess, the further back we push it. But we want the right strategy, yeah, absolutely.
No disrespect, but the local plan has been out of date for donkey's years. Yeah. So all I'm saying is we need to do it right. And it's no point, and in my eyes, it's always been my own, if you take the time to do the right strategy, it will last you for that time, than rushing it, and then you're always having to tweak or change huge parts of it because we haven't done the consultation right. And an engagement consultation, especially for the residents, is the most important thing for, or personally for me, from a council, and probably from every councillor that I will speak about, because we represent our residents in our ward.
Can I echo that, Joe? Because I mean, we've got so many problems at the moment, which, you know, are partly caused by COVID and partly other factors are causing them, but certainly which will which are difficult to solve. So, for example, when you came to the Labour group, we talked about GP surgeries. So I'm sure it's not only my ward, but it's very, very difficult to get a doctor's appointment. It's very, very difficult to get through on the phones because of the very high demand at the moment. We've got people who are waiting longer for surgery, so they're deteriorating. So we've got more people and more sick people in the community, all needed, increasing that demand on primary healthcare and on our GP surgeries, and the national shortage of GPs. So it's kind of like a perfect storm in primary care at the moment. And I know I did speak to you about my real concerns about people not being able to access primary healthcare and having some very serious consequences to that situation. So also I want to clarify, there isn't a strategy at the moment. There's just the 6 domains, because from Councillor Snell's comments on the strategy being really good, have I missed the strategy, or have you just outlined the 6 domains that we're looking at and we're going out for consultation? Can you clarify that, please?
So the high level goal, so on the slides that I showed, there was a lot of words on there that I didn't go through all the words. That's we have much more detail than this, but that's sort of our summary of what we are proposing our goals should be. So if I share these slides round, then you'll be able to see what those goals are. I mean, we've obviously, behind each of the domain, we've done a brief needs assessment. We've looked at what the challenges are, what the barriers are. We've consulted with stakeholders with a particular interest in each of these different areas, and that's why we've linked very much to the Brighter Future strategy, but also to Stronger Together Thurrock for the community engagement bit. The Thurrock Integrated Care Partnership is leading the development of this adult health and care strategy, and that's where the detail of, say, for example, access to primary care and the actions we're going to take will sit in that strategy. Because if we had that level of detail on everything in the health and wellbeing strategy, it would become unmanageable. But so that's kind of how we're approaching it, if that helps.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure I hadn't missed the strategy in this report. I don't think I did. This is mainly the consultation. Yeah,
no, it's the papering that you've got is mainly about the consultation approach. Yeah.
So we've got the 6 domains, but that's fine. I just want to say also, Joe, we do appreciate that the public health team is obviously still coping with the pandemic, at the same time as trying to produce this strategy before it runs out. So we do appreciate the work of our colleagues in public health and everything that they've done to keep us safe during the pandemic. So thank you, and if you pass your thanks on to your colleagues, we do appreciate that.
Thank you, that means a lot, and I will pass that on to the team. I know they'll appreciate it. Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, let's move to the recommendation, which is, there's one recommendation that members note the consultation exercise considering proposed opportunities to engage the public and interested parties during the consultation period.
Noted.
Joe, can I just ask that you do ask if you can move that deadline? Just for more consultation.
Yeah, I'll raise that with Councillor Haldon. Yeah.
So, thank you everyone. That concludes the business of the meeting this evening, and I now declare the meeting closed at 21:04.